1800s, that there was like a noticeable kind of global cooling. Like the world was considerably colder than it had been in centuries past. And then, of course, now with global warming, we are experiencing massive heat waves, which I'm sure will eventually equalize, but whether or not we'll be here is another matter.
Well, that's the point of one of my classes. One of my classes this semester is plant insect interactions in the fossil record. And what's interesting about studying that is there are several periods where temperature changes rapidly, especially along the PETM. See if I can remember Paleoeocene thermal maximum, which is it's like a 10,000 year period where temperatures increased kind of similar to how they are today from like modern climate change. And looking at the patterns of how insects responded to that in like consuming plants can give you an idea of how ecosystems might respond to what's happening now. Like give you kind of a ballpark. Like for example, when it gets warmer, insect herbivory tends to increase. So it's like because they're cold-blooded and they have more energy to move around, more energy to eat. They also require more energy. So it kind of supercharges the bugs. So
and there are more
what that
plants,
eventually means.
And there are more plants to go around. And there are more plants to go around, like at least at first, because generally speaking, plants tend to like really warm climates. Like you said, then they'd overfeed and blah blah blah.
There's a lot of other stuff that happens too, but that's kind of the gist of it. It's a pretty cool class.
Sounds like it.
It's actually why I pitched Ancient April as our theme, because it got me. Before I decided I wanted to study in like living animals, I used to be pretty interested in paleontology kind of stuff. So I mean, I would go to the museum and look at dinosaurs like all the time, and I worked for the museum for a little bit.
That's what you need.
Oh no, God. Fedoras are ugly. Unless like you're doing a Freddy Krueger costume, you shouldn't own a fedora. They are hideous.
Have like a satchel. I think that makes the fedora a little more easily pulled off.
Or
thing. Okay, that's better.
What if you combine the two? What if you did Freddy Jones, Indiana Kruger?
Just put the fucking glove on the end of the whip.
Something like that.
Looks like Dave is recording it at this point, so.
Oh shit, we live.
Welcome everyone to our talk on Quest for Fire and pretty much anything prehistoric related. So my initial thing there, I was thinking about that kind of a lot during maybe more so during this movie, because today's movie was Quest for Fire. I hope somebody else is hosting, by the way, because I am not ready.
So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Inside Movies Galore. I am your host, David Straggy. And we are going to discuss, as Dustin has said, one of our prehistoric movies for tonight, and it is directed by Jean-Jacques Annaud. Was filmed in 1981, and let's just say the story takes place in prehistoric time when three tribesmen search for a new fire source. So why don't we get first impressions here? I'll start with you, Dustin. What was your first impression of this film for you? Was this the first time watch for you?
I'd never even heard of it before, and I almost skipped it because I had like a lot of work to do. Again, for courses.
I'm glad you didn't, bud.
Yeah, I am too. So, I just kind of had it on in the background and like glanced over at it like every couple seconds while I was working on something. And after a point, like I started like really like intently watching it. Like it gets pretty good. So my impression was pretty positive, and this feels the most nature documentary. I think that's kind of what they were going for. This is sort of the most nature documentary, like attempt to be accurate to prehistoric conditions. Although I don't know if I can necessarily say 80,000 years ago is prehistoric in at least the sense that I had initially conceived of it for the topic. Although, then again, Megalodon only went extinct, 12,000 years ago? So
okay. There were some woolly mammoths in there, so
there were. Those were...
usually prehistoric is referring to like before recorded history. I mean, obviously humans existed in some form, but back before there was recordings that we could go back to and consult.
Which I think that's, again, isn't that like 1,200 years? I think 12,000 years,
something like that. I mean,
it depends on, I think, if you're considering cave paintings to be recorded history, though.
Yes, that's true.
I think we're thinking more like...
I mean, that's like
built infrastructure.
Or at least like some kind of written language, like, Egyptian hieroglyphs or something. I mean, the cave paintings at, forget what the cave's name is, but... the oldest cave paintings that we have, I mean, that's kind of pictographical.
Right, that's what I'm getting at. Like, I wouldn't consider that recorded history. I'm on the same page of the written language,
Yeah.
I don't know. These guys were writing out their grunts.
Which, I mean, I was gonna introduce myself with
we should have. I'm telling you, we should have done like the first 10 minutes of this just in grunts, man.
Well, nobody would have known what was going on.
You subtitle it on the fucking screen.
This is now the new tribe of the Ulam. So everyone grunt their favorite grunt before we
Would be wild to read a transcript of this movie.
It would.
Be like the Denver Fenton Allen thing that Rick and Morty did.
I mean,
one of my favorite little moments, which I have to give the actors a lot of credit for this, was the fact that, not only did they sufficiently create a very primitive human sounds and behaviors and all that, but I really, really liked when the rock falls on the one guy's head the first time. I think it was on Ron Perlman's head, not on the other guy where he actually bleeds. But like the first time, and the girl is laughing in that really... Well, it's like that weird place between animalistic, and, like ape-like, and human. Like, she laughs in a really weird way, and I like the attention to detail there, because it's like you can see humor starting to come into existence in the way that we know it today, but they still have one foot in the ape world.
Yeah, I definitely got thoughts on that shit.
That was a good touch.
Things are in development. And you can kind of tell, like, you can see sort of the transitional phases that some things went through.
Yeah,
that was a fun thing to appreciate.
Yeah, they were going for that transition.
That's you, Jake. I was wondering who the hell that was.
That's doing what?
Hey. Speaking of Jake, why don't you tell us your impression of this particular film?
All right, and my apologies for being late. Skype sucks. Anyway.
Yeah, it does.
Anyway, this was my first time seeing this.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I had not seen this. I think I had heard of it in passing, as Brandon pointed out a few times. This was an Oscar winner, I believe, for the makeup.
Best makeup.
So, yep. Although I kind of joked that they could have just brought Ron Perlman in off the street, and he would have been just fine, save money on him.
Yeah, they really did not have to make him very much.
I know what they did.
All they really did was give him longer hair.
A little Frankenstein wax on his forehead and called it a day, I think.
It was like they just told him, like, hey man, don't shave for a week. All right, good.
Yeah.
Down to eat them off.
Maybe rough yourself up a little bit. That's fine, yeah.
I actually tried to pull that once when I went to the Lincoln, I believe it was, to the casting call. I intentionally didn't cut my hair for a while before that, but I would have gone even longer if I'd known sooner. Not that anything came of it, but whatever.
I'd be interested if if Ron Perlman could, I don't know if he has or hasn't, but I'd be interested if he would do the kind of the DNA test as far as and beyond like the usual one where they tell you most likely where your ancestors are from and everything. I mean like the one that Ozzy Osbourne got, because when he did his one, he found out that he had a particularly high concentration of Neanderthal DNA.
Dude, do we really need him to do it though? Is the thing.
That's
like, is it even necessary for him to?
That's what I'm saying. I wonder if his concentration would be even higher. I don't know.
You never know. You never know.
That's my point though. Is like you look at Ozzy Osbourne just as a person, you're like, yeah, but you're like, that's still it's still a human, you know. It's
yeah, right.
But the reason why I bring it up is because of his unique mixture of Neanderthal DNA, that is part of what gave him such a resistance to all of the years of drug abuse and everything beyond that of a normal human. It's true. It's true. Look it up. But that's kind of what I was. That's what I'm saying though. It's like if you look at Ron Perlman, it's like who knows what his genetic makeup is.
Well, and if I'm remembering correctly,
23andMe has 23andMe is kind of
does it go back that far?
Well, 23andMe has had kind of some issues, I think, with how accurate it actually is. Like, it only gives you kind of... It's not as precise as people think it is. Yeah. But that reminds me of a joke from a live show from my favorite podcast, Chapo Trap House. Like, they were doing a stage show, and they were talking about how 23andMe kind of has these problems, like certain problems with being estimates. And one guy was like, you know, and I kind of hate 23andMe because I took the test and I got a letter from them saying that I had more Neanderthal DNA than 95% of people who have ever taken 23andMe tests.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody else on the stage, they're called the Irish, okay?
That's something I'd be proud of. I'd be telling people that as a badge of honor.
Yeah, I probably would too. I mean, I did Ancestry. I did Ancestry.com.
But I was laughing too hard.
I did Ancestry.com. That was the one that I did, and yeah, I know that it's more of a kind of genetic probability relative to where people with your similar genetic makeup, most frequently come from. And I mean, if you want to go way back, then technically every human descends from Africa at some point in the past. But like, you know, it is. I think it's fun to think about that. But like with the, you know, if you look back in some of the, I think it was actually Johnny Knoxville who was able to, either through DNA or through a genealogist or something, maybe even both, he was able to figure out that he was the product of a lot of inbreeding, and he was like really proud of that.
So much.
Exactly. And that's,
you know what I think is fun.
That's not even like a slur or anything. Like he actually held it up as like a badge of honor.
Yeah, there's videos online about it and shit. You know what I think is fun is the idea of a sketch with like Genghis Khan on Maury. Because, you know, they say everyone's descended from Genghis Khan, and it's like just Genghis Khan on Maury, and he's getting the news that he's not the father, and he gets up and he just wilds out like they do when they're like, bitch, I told you, you know?
Yeah, apparently his DNA is in so many humans.
Most of us.
Well, from that part of the world for sure, but like it's pretty amazing.
One odd thing that I've looked up, I actually did a lot of research into this for my, the writings that may happen. But I did a lot of research into this, and I believe I read that they have determined. I'm not sure who they were. I don't recall offhand, but they have determined that. Because the Neanderthal race, which apparently is, some people say is merely a subspecies of the human race, so they're not necessarily all that different in a lot of ways. I think they determined that they originated in Europe or in Asia Minor, something in that region, and that one of the things that may have contributed to their disappearance was inbreeding with humans. But that apparently the only group that never got in on the action was Africa. So they determined that the Neanderthal gene is in pretty much every human race except for those from Africa.
Yeah, it especially has a higher concentration in people of European descent.
Right.
Because I think that, like you said, that was more where they were concentrated.
That's beautiful irony right there.
Yeah, it's I think it's pretty neat, but I believe that you're right that the Neanderthals were not nearly as different from, not so wildly different that they couldn't have bred with Homo sapiens.
Some of the other
ahead of ourselves here, though. Jake, what was your overall first impression of this bitch?
Oh, yeah, I never really did say that. It was interesting. It was definitely something different. Like, it was almost like you could almost think of like a nature docudrama in a lot of ways. It was kind of, it was different. And it did have some humor in it. It did have some pretty. I love the music.
Did the violence get to you a little bit? I forgot.
There were a couple. Well, there were a couple scenes that I kind of cringed a little bit.
Yeah, you could sort of tell this was French in its sensibilities, with very gratuitous sexuality everywhere at all times.
I don't know that that's entirely inaccurate, though. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to that.
I mean, I'm sure it was normal, but at the same time, it was just kind of like.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, most of the, like, there's a lot of nudity and stuff, but it's, for the most part, it's not really sexual in nature. I mean, there's some, sexuality out in the open, but I mean, obviously at that time and with primitive humans, it's like, apes do that all the time. Like, a lot of mammals do that all the time, and it's not weird.
I'm sure we're gonna hape a lot of the praise for that kind of stuff on the main scenes, but that kid, that lemur, walks over there looking like fucking Jesse Eisenberg and tries to get down at the stream is probably the funniest one.
Yeah, you can definitely this one. I could definitely hear that old song, the "Do It Like You Do" on Discovery Channel. But one thing that was very amusing and sad at the same time. And I rag on Ron Perlman because he is not an attractive person, but he is a hell of an actor, and I like him as an actor. He's a cool dude. But I felt kind of bad for him and for some of the others because it seemed like it was the one dude all throughout the movie who kept. I was like, everyone else
getting injured.
Well, no, they kept getting, the women's.
Yeah, he got the girl. Well, he did get bitten on the dick, which was not fun. But like, he also, but apparently, like, it didn't debilitate him in that area because he still managed to. Yeah, he still managed to get the girl. He managed to go to the more advanced tribe and find the.
We don't know how much time passed after she applied the salve, and I've got a whole thing I need to say about that later.
But that was an interesting thing.
So what was your overall? Just did you like it though, Jake?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't say it's one I'm going to be watching regularly, but it's one I'm kind of glad I did see.
It's a revisit once every 10 years kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's about the rate that I just did it with.
If I have an excuse to get back to it.
What was your first impressions on this film?
Well, this was this was my suggestion, oddly enough. Actually, I think this is a weird month. I think both of Jake's suggestions and both of mine were the ones that got hit. This one I wanted to do more than the other one because, to me, this spoke prehistory, but also it was an Oscar winner that I needed an excuse to see. And so that was my main interest in watching it in the first place. But I found it very fascinating watching it for the first time. Just all the various things, and then going through a lot of the special features and even listening to the commentaries, hearing all of the stuff, all the research that they did, all of the consultations they made with scientists, the fact that it wasn't just grunts, they went in and created their own language. Not as complex as, say, like Tolkien, but
Right.
it was a simple language that they taught all of them, and they had them memorize it. That's why
Yeah,
you don't have subtitles, because
you-
It
So,
was
sorry.
a whole new
It's like
language.
contextual.
There's certain words that do repeat though, if you listen.
Yeah.
Like there is
Oh, yeah.
a little language in there for sure.
Oh yeah, it was a definite language. There was a script. It was an actual script that they had to do correctly.
Was it one, or did they do different ones for the different tribes?
That I'm not sure of, but I'm pretty sure that they went ahead and used the same script book.
Dialect.
Oh.
Well,
Yeah,
Well,
dialect
doing
thing.
I'm gonna
different
go
tones.
through the. Well, apparently the tribe that we first see is a tribe that's called Ulam, and these were a
The
tribe
Neanderthals.
who had evidently possessed a very specific form of fire, where they carefully guarded small flame, which they used to start larger fires.
Well, I mean that was the idea, is historic man, and they go over it in the little blurb at the beginning, but they also talk about it in some of the excerpts. Is that it's thought that prehistoric man, of course, came upon fire by accident from like lightning strikes,
Yeah.
and then would keep it. Then some tribes would have the same fire burning literally for generations because they didn't know how to start the darn thing. So it was just, because if it went out, well,
Speaking of Brandon, you almost forgot to put this on the poll. You're like our keeper of the flame. You're that dude that's like, trying to cross the bog.
Oh god.
For reference, as far as the language goes, it was developed by Anthony Burgess, who wrote A Clockwork Orange and developed Nadsat from Cockney rhyming
sweet.
slang and Russian.
Damn.
That's how he developed that, and because he was a linguist as well as a author, same like Tolkien was a linguist as well, and so he was able to do that with this language as well.
Sorry I cut you off there, Brandon. I just made the connection in my head. Had to get it out before I lost it there.
Well,
Oh yeah, that happens to me
and I
all
was
the
just
time.
impressed. I was really impressed to say by the film
and the
because
film
detail.
pretty much followed like the three survivors of this attack that happened from another ape-like tribe
Well, more
called
than that,
the Wagaboo. The Wagaboo.
I was
That's
calling
what
them Australopithecus, or Bigfoot. You could call them Bigfoot too. They look like the thing from Abominable.
They
A
look
little bit. I think
They
we
look
lost Dane's first impression in there, though, didn't we? Or...
yeah,
we-
we're saying Dane.
well,
and,
we-
Oh, sorry, Dane.
done yours, and we haven't done Dane's yet.
This was my first time seeing it. I had wanted to see it after hearing about it, and I heard about it in kind of different ways. Like some people were kind of making fun of it or whatever, but like I watched it, didn't know a whole lot about it besides. I mean, the title thankfully does tell you exactly what the film is about, and I really love the fact that we don't have subtitles for this because, even though they developed the language, I really like the fact that we just have to use our eyes and our ears to determine what's going on. And the story is simple and universal enough to where all that you would really have to do to make it a worldwide success is just change the language of the little blurb in the beginning, and that's it. So that's. I think that was
genius.
Well, I think that's really smart because, and I'm surprised as films become more international in terms of how they're financed and marketed and where they play and everything. I would think that it would make more sense to have films that didn't need a whole lot of dialogue or translation, and you could figure out the story from what was happening on screen. I would think that there would be more films like that, but there aren't for some reason. But That's what I liked about this film, was that it forced you to do what the silent films would always do very well, which is tell the story through the visuals and through the music, because that is
Mhm.
what filmmaking is. And
Yeah, the
you
general
could
atmosphere and the vibe too. Like
that
you know, it's
and the acting, like, you had to get all of the necessary character information based on how they behaved around each other, what their facial expressions signified, the tones of their voice, kind of it just all those different things, the context of what was happening. To me, that's really good storytelling cinematically, and it's really nice that there was a film that was able to do that and kind of go all the way with it. It's a simple story, but an effective one, a journey, kind of a classic story there, but it is truly universal, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Really love the makeup, of course. But I just, for me, what made it so great was the purity of the storytelling. It was about as close as you could get to what silent films did so well back in the old days.
Okay. What
true.
about you, Mo?
Agreed.
What was your first impression of this film?
Oh, I fucking loved it, man. But I was coming into this from stuff like Clan of the Cave Bear, which arguably is probably the caveman movie I think more people have seen, even though it might not have quite the prestige of something like this. I don't know. I don't know what awards Clan of the Cave Bear won, or like, who
Well,
exactly was involved in it on a
this
technical
also
end.
wasn't this also wasn't 10,000 BC with Raquel Welch either.
Yeah, I
Oh well,
was
I mean,
really
it's no creatures the world forgot either. It's definitely this type of shit on a new level. I mean, the dialogue absent caveman film is not a new idea at this point. But I think Quest for Fire took it and owned the shit out of it. As far as my first impression, I saw it as like pretty young. I wasn't necessarily as learned on movies and things like that, so it was just kind of a I would almost say that I like Clan of the Cave Bear better on the right day, but this is like a better version of that movie, I think. You know, Even though I think plot wise they couldn't be more different, but uh,
Well,
I
yeah,
don't know.
Clan of the Cape Bear was actually based on a novel by a dude
Yeah,
named,
exactly.
and I almost wish that they would have continued the book series in movie form, because there was more to the story, because there were like 4 or 5 books in the series. So, but
Right, that'd have been sick. But I mean, I don't know. As I got older, I guess my impression of this film became a lot more of like fascination and awe of just how it's shot and
mhm.
like how well they tell the story. Other movies have done the same thing, but they kind of
Well,
fucking sucked,
even
honestly.
Tarzan is a variation of the caveman, so to me,
I don't
films
know
of
that I connect the two, but I mean, my point is that I was just, as time went on, I became more fascinated with how well this movie tells the story without any dialogue, as opposed to like other movies that I've seen where they try to do the same thing and it's just not as effective.
Yeah.
And just
This
visually, I think this might be one of those first movies where I really started like properly just appreciating the visuals in a movie and the way it's shot and the landscapes and all that type of stuff. This is probably right top of
well,
the list ones
and
that
this was
made me
actually
start paying attention to that.
and this was actually not my first time watching this. I actually saw this many years ago. I'm not exactly sure when, but I didn't understand why there was no dialogue at the moment, because I was so used to having it. But now that I'm older, I have an appreciation for it, for having no dialogue, having had the love for films of this nature. Now, I it's not that there's no dialogue. There is a dialogue. It's just an invented dialogue.
Mm.
I mean, I have seen a film from Canada called Three Dead Trick-or-Treaters,
Hmm.
where it is entirely shot with just the music and the visuals, and it's an anthology of a horror anthology, and I thought that was brilliant.
It
So
sounds pretty
Oh,
brilliant.
right. Yeah, it sounds fucking fun. I mean, and that's the cool part about this, at least if you fucking saw it like when you were younger, is you can grow up and like compare it to shit. Like the silent film connection I wouldn't have made back when I first saw it, because I was not really turned on to that stuff. I probably wouldn't have made it even around the time in high school when I was like really getting into this. I don't think I'd seen a silent film outside of Nosferatu until like
I'd seen a
junior
bunch.
year of high school.
I'd seen a bunch of them when I was a kid. Like I watched the original Phantom of the Opera and things like that.
That would've been so sick to see
I
as a kid.
I loved it.
Dane even created a silent film.
Yes, I did, and
Yeah.
that was a really rewarding experience because of the things that I've said. That it's the purity of storytelling. Because they had so little to work with, they had fewer things to fall back on, and so they had to have really pure, just straightforward, no bullshitting about it. They just had to tell a story effectively.
Yeah, physical,
and
emotional acting.
yeah, and that's something that I really loved about this film was that, a film like this typically doesn't necessarily get called out for its acting, but I would like to, just because like this is so not conventional like theater acting or conventional film acting. Like they're having to not only communicate emotions without dialogue that we can understand, but they also have to emote while also emoting the feelings of primitive humans that are one tiny step out of true animalistic instinct, and one very tiny step at that, because like for the most part they do still behave in very ape-like ways. And
For sure. Yeah.
so
I
they
mean,
so they have to find ways to emote within all of those constraints and still not be too modern in their approach to things.
Right.
And
It makes me really wonder what type of theater or different acting styles they studied, which I'm sure we'll get around to asking Brandon, since he definitely went deep on this bitch and watched like commentaries and stuff.
I would think you'd have to study like apes in a zoo or something. I would think you'd have to study
a
that.
little bit of that, a little bit of
Mime.
silent film, maybe some of that fucking Japanese like theater, not the stuff that's like kabuki, but the other shit or whatever.
Yeah.
They did the same thing for Throne of Blood, I guess. Like they studied all that type of shit.
What's
And
interesting is that when you see Ron Perlman up in that tree, and he's eating that egg, he's got the characteristics of an egg.
That's definitely incorporated in there, but I feel like some of the physical stuff in the movie was a little exaggerated to make up for lack of, like, I don't know, dialogue or whatever.
Well, but you would have to. I mean, if you look at animals in nature, if they are, they kind of do one of two things. They tend to be like really kind of silent and stoic, or if they're trying to get someone, another member of their tribe or their species or whatever, if they're trying to get their attention, then they'll kind of, like if they're a chimpanzee, for example, they'll kind of flail around wildly and make a lot of noise.
Yeah, they make up for the lack of verbalization with physicality, for sure.
Well, and you notice that also with when they weren't grunting or moving around or trying to get attention or whatever, they were being very still and very stoic and very minimally expressive, which you do see on like chimpanzees' face.
Especially with the laugh part, that's a good illustration, I think, of that shit.
Well, and chimpanzees and other apes, they have kind of shown those similar kind of the primordial ingredients for what we would call humor, as far as being able to appreciate, things that are kind of pratfally with their fellow apes.
Right.
And which is pretty fascinating to think about, that another species besides us can comprehend humor in some form or fashion. But so I mean that could not have been easy to kind of get into that headspace and make sure that you convey the characterizations and emotions that you need to convey while also not being too civilized about it. and that's for
Right.
for
Well-
the men and for the women too. I mean, because it's a different kind of thing. Because like again, like animals in the wild, they will just mount a female when they feel like it, and
Oh, we'll get to that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme in the movie. I don't know. I think we should
I-
hand it back to Dave here, though, so that he can usher us through this bitch with keep us on
Yeah.
track here.
I'm just
Make
gonna
the trains run on time.
give a condensed version of the plot here. So apparently 3 of the Ulam tribe escaped this bloody battle from this ape tribe that is basically like cannibalistic creatures of some sort,
Technically, they're not.
and
cannibalistic.
they end up
I think they were just after the
they
fire.
were eating the dead.
No, that's
well,
later on.
yeah,
they were-
but
they-
Those,
they were.
those
they're
are
a
those
different
ginger
species.
troglodytes, dude.
Yeah, these seem like
Bigfoot
like
is
more,
not
saw
cannibal
that-
for eating humans.
I saw
yeah,
that.
they're different species, really.
I saw that
That's what I was trying to say.
something that looked like meat. But in any case, they move on, and obviously they find their way through the wilderness until they come upon another tribe that seems to have a couple of other female tribe members from a different race that were entirely in black. Evidently, they helped her escape, and then they journeyed some more. And from what I understand, a lot of it is visual. A lot of it is the landscape. They end up running into a cougar and some lions along the way, which make them get chased up a tree. I like that part, where it seems like they're all afraid of coming down from it, and it almost kind of looked like that tree where the vulture are sitting on top of saying, "What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know."
Hey, don't
What do you
put
from the
that
Jungle
in.
Book? Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Of
part
course,
that
these lines made up so that they're apparently supposed to be saber-toothed cats.
Mhm.
Oh, they
So
were
that was
glorious.
interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
I
they're
know
not
that
sure.
saber-toothed tigers are supposed to look kind of like that, as like they're not tiger-like in the way that we think of them today. They're from the various renderings and stuff. They do look a little bit more lion-like, but
They did a good job. I think they wedged some false teeth into some ligers and called it a day.
Pretty much.
So our
Yeah.
first scene is pretty much them chilling out in the cave, like our main tribe here. They've got a keeper of the flame. Dude, like, nurtures this little ember that sits inside of this bone sort of lantern that they've constructed. And they use this to cook
Yeah,
meats very poorly. And they just pretty much gorge themselves on wildlife and lay around having big old caveman sleepovers. There's some decent tit in the first little sequence, if you don't mind to pronounce brow ridge on your lady. And they're pretty much just sleeping around, and these fucking 8 men decide to attack. What was your thoughts on that first attack sequence there, Dave?
The one with the apes, or the
Yeah,
the
where
one
those
with
fucking
or
where those
the
gorilla suit dudes come out and they're like trying to steal their flame.
I actually thought that they were like pre-Planet of the Apes. So at least in suit form with with you're so used to seeing man in the gorilla suit, kind of people. But instead, this was like more facial makeup than it was.
It reminded me of the Bigfoot from fucking The Man Who Killed Hitler and then Bigfoot,
Yeah.
actually. like a
It-
tiny
they-
or
the
Bigfoot.
They look-
Hendersons.
They looked a lot like. Well, I thought of Harry and the Hendersons, and then I thought mostly of Abominable, like the 2004-ish.
Yeah, I loved that movie
Maybe.
so much.
Didn't they look like almost exactly like the thing from Abominable? Like
A bit, yes.
It was
They're
distracting.
pretty fucking close. What did you guys think of? I mean, Dave specifically. What do you think about the when those guys first attacked? What do you think about old Jesse Eisenberg, Lemur walking out there and mounting that chick at the stream? Like, there's a lot of good stuff to unpack in there. What was your highlight of probably that opening sequence?
Well, it was all kind of weird because these cavemen obviously were bored out of their minds, and they were just laying back doing jack shit, and so when these 8 things came along and decided to attack them, they were caught unawares, and so the 3 that escaped were probably just the 2 stupidest and the one smartest out of the group.
Well, they
that
managed to get
obviously
maybe
was
conservatively a quarter of the
he
people
was
out of it.
already some distance from the area that was attacked. So by the time he came back around, most of the tribe had been slaughtered. So he got in on the action. I mean, it is kind of weird seeing Ron Perlman a little bit young. This is Brie Vincent, Beauty and the Beast.
Or
what year was this movie
Yeah,
from?
81.
81.
Not to mention Everett McGill is much younger here than I've used to seeing.
So
Yeah.
what about you there,
And not-
Dane?
not
What's
used-
your main take? Sorry, Dave. Go finish up.
Was not used to seeing him, Everett, so babyface Nelson.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
Well,
What about you
Dirty
there,
Face
Dane?
Nelson, whatever.
What's your take? What's your main takeaway from the whole first sort of cave massacre scene?
I mean, it's kind of well, I had in the pre-show I mentioned Apocalypto a lot. Obviously that's very different because that is historic times and with a very rich civilization. But story structure wise, you have a tribe of people that live in the wilderness. They get attacked by, well, in that film, it's a more advanced tribe that lives in the city, but in this case, it's the opposite. It's a less advanced tribe, but it's kind of a similar story structure, and it kind of forces our protagonists out of their comfort zone and onto their big journey. Blah blah blah.
Mhm.
I think it's effective. For what it is. It definitely gets things started on a good note. I think that the movie, I think, really like it starts off well, but I do think that the main thrust of the story really makes itself known once they actually go on their journey, because that's
for
when
sure.
you get that very kind of prototypical, if you want to even think of it in like Lord of the Rings terms, you have like the very kind of prototypical
Selection of the crew and all that.
and like fellowship, or like or more
Yeah.
specifically like
God
Frodo,
damn it!
Sam.
I hate that you beat me to making the Lord of the Rings connection.
Well,
too.
but more
I'm
so,
not gonna lie.
the Frodo, Sam, and Gollum connection, just because it's 3 of them instead of 9. Which I liked that a lot more because there was more focused in the second story there. But like here we have 3 and then eventually 4 with the girl. But I really think when you really get to know those characters through their actions and their interactions on their quests, I think that is really when the movie starts to come alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
Well,
sure.
it's a good opening scene to kind of get the thing started.
So what about you,
I suppose
Dustin?
you could make.
Go ahead, Dave.
I said I suppose you could make a Wizard of Oz reference if you wanted to think about 4 of them.
That's true.
True, but there's no man
Or
at the
out
end
on
behind a curtain, unfortunately. It's just cannibals and death.
Well, there is a wondrous invention that they use to better themselves, like in the Wizard of Oz, like despite him being a fraud, like he does have some things that are useful from the other side. Now, in their case, they obviously had something extraordinarily useful and like world changing, quite literally, at their disposal. But
For sure. But so, Dustin, what were your takeaways from this opener?
Well, the opening scene was like, we've commented that the movie feels somewhat like a nature documentary, and after the attack happens in the opening. Sorry, I just kind of there we go. Now I can think again. I had to burp. I've been drinking an energy drink.
It's understandable.
Anyway, so the movie has this nature documentary feel to it, like we've said. And when the attack happens, it feels sort of like it stops necessarily being that. We transition into something that's like, oh, it's going to have some kind of narrative. Like there's going to be stuff happening that's not just like slice of life kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the attack was pretty effective. It's not. I can't necessarily say, oh, it's an excuse to separate them from the group and get them wandering around, because it doesn't feel like a cheap plot device like that.
Right, and well, the theme of attacking more advanced people for fire is carried through the movie.
They just happen to blunder into the advanced people, and it's also just kind of establishing the rules of this world too, where you can just grab somebody, I suppose.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised by that, but then I was like, oh well. They're basically still animals at this point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's kind of what I took away from it, because I kept kind of thinking. Well, I thought it was kind of humorous because of that, but I was sort of thinking, well, in the one scene where Ron Perlman was wanting to get some, and she wasn't having that, it's sort of, to me, it brought up questions of are they civilized and intelligent enough to have concepts of rape and consent and things like that? Because animals in the wild, they just the males of the species, they kind of jump the females whenever they feel like it, and they're just
not necessarily.
I think this movie explores a little bit of that.
Not necessarily. There's a lot to animal courtship behaviors. There's a lot of instances where you get rejections,
and where you get taught a lesson in this, where it's not always that way, man.
Well, and that was something that was nice to see, was you had it was a more subtle version of the kind of male competition for dominance.
They took the time to do it, and that's nice, because a lot of other caveman movies would have just had the loincloth swinging.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Well, but what I liked about it was that it was kind of a more subtle show of dominance, rather than
because he thought about it for a sec. If you look back on the scene, he thought about it for a second, and then he did it just to show that dude what was up,
Yeah, well, and also you also saw that it was not your classical almost like Star Trek duel, show of dominance, kind of man on man duel kind of thing. Right. It was more of just a subtle display of dominance rather than a formal duel, which I thought that was nice, because you do see that in nature. Well, and you also see, like you said, with the courtship rituals, you see a relationship begin to form between this main guy and the girl. You see it. It's very primitive and simplistic, but you do get to see it.
I think it's very tender too at the same time when it all comes back around,
Yeah,
as far as in terms of this film.
When you see some some early things, she doesn't want to, she rejects Ron
being
Perlman
raped, which most people should. Again, we'll dive into that. Jake and Brandon, why don't you guys you guys are familiar with trading off, so I don't think I have to tell you when. Go ahead and tell us your impressions of this opening sequence. And then we'll go ahead and let Dave lead us into the bog scene.
Actually,
Alright.
I would like to
Sure.
say that a lot of this, the director was going for them having a lot of firsts, like first discovering love, first discovering how to create fire, first discovering this and that, and that first scene kind of starts them off at their bare basics. In a way, the movie itself shows an evolution, and to show an evolution, you've got to have a starting point. And I think that that's what they were doing, is they were saying, okay, this is what they started as, and you'll get to see them develop and change as it goes on. So that was their, the part before they hit that. So that would be their factory reset specifiers right there.
Right.
Yeah, and that you can definitely see that at work. Like, once the main guy and the girl, once they kind of advance, she's more okay with, like, they have more cuddling at night, and she feels safe around him and is okay with tagging along on their journey and everything like that. And they do more of, like, missionary style instead of doggy
Yeah, it eventually develops into some sweet Barry White love.
Yeah, well,
Like,
and
Hey, girl.
making a baby at the end, which of course that's very important for advancing the species. But I did like the fact that it starts off in, like, your classical kind of male mammal mounts the female mammal, kind of thing that we're used to seeing in nature documentaries, and then it did move into more like kind of classical love making in the sense that we think of it today with modern
Right.
humans.
Man, so Jake, what was your thoughts? What was your takeaway from that? I don't know if it got ever handed off.
Well, it basically, I did see a bit of a major shift with that. It does kind of start off very much with that documentary sort of vibe, sort of that slice of life sort of vibe, and you definitely, when the attack happened, it was like you're like, oh well, no good will come of this, and you're sitting there kind of watching, how's this going to play out, and then finally it settles, and you see the survivors regroup on the island and all that kind of stuff, and I remember looking at the clock on there, going, wow, 15 minutes in, and it feels like they just killed everybody off. It's like, I'm like, well, where are they going from here?
Now what?
And also, I couldn't help but feel a little bit amused that in a film called Quest for Fire, it opens with Ron Perlman sitting in front of a fire, and he's, and I'm like, well, what's the
He
quest?
eats a fucking moth.
Mission accomplished, guys.
Exactly.
He just
Yeah,
snatches a
yeah.
moth out of midair and
Roll
fucking
credits,
eats
you
it.
know?
That's like the first scene of the movie.
Right.
Actually, it was
Like
a piece of marzipan,
apparently
according to
tribe. Apparently the tribe is able, as a whole,
right.
to start large fires, but they do not know how to create.
Well, because
Right.
like Brandon pointed out, it's like from like lightning.
Right.
Fire happens and then they take it and keep it. That's why there's
Right.
like that keeper of the flame, dude.
And
you
that
know.
guy needs to be fired, by the way. But anyway,
Oh
Yeah,
Well,
he
it's-
sucks.
Well, same with the guy that falls in the bog as soon as they bring the fire back. I'm like, you had one job, and then you already.
Oh, but we gotta put
they
ourselves,
were
I
gonna,
guess, in the
beat his ass
footsteps
when
of
that happened.
primitive humans. I mean, he's
I
just
know.
trying to get back to the group. He's panicking just as much as they were when they left,
Yeah,
which was a
I
considerable
get it.
amount.
It's like you can't be overly harsh on them. But
right.
one of my favorite moments is when our main hero, when he tries to start the fire on his own, and then the girl's like, "Honey, I'll do it," and she does it.
He saw her do it, but he doesn't quite know exactly why it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, we'll
just the way that she did that, like she didn't even have to say it, but I heard it in my head, and I was like, "That's funny." Not a lot has changed since then.
right. I mean, I guess from the cave scene, you got to go to that whole scene where they're the desperate remnants of whoever survived this onslaught with the 8
Right.
people, which has a surprising amount of gore effects in it. Actually, there's
Yeah.
like a spear through the throat. There's a monkey that gets its arm ripped off. There's all types of cool stuff in there. It definitely lives up to what we've been talking about here.
Yeah.
It's a hell of an opener. And
I
then
think-
they're desperately like, I love that scene where they're like desperately fucking trying to find some place to go. Like they get right out of there and then they realize they're in like the harsh elements of the world instead of their cave. So they flee to that fucking island in the middle of the bog, and that one twin that ends up going on the quest has to leave his brother there. That's like one of the, to me, a pretty fucking powerful moment of the movie.
Well, they
You know,
realized real
like
quick
he
that
loved.
fire.
They have the concept of love and like relationships enough that he carried him that far. But then eventually he just lets him get sucked down into the bog and walks off. His brother becomes one of those bog men. They spend a whole special unearthing on the BBC later on.
He now lives in the London Museum.
He's a celebrity. He made it big.
Yeah.
He's now the caveman.
A few thousand years after his death. That's okay.
Yeah, kind of like old Lucy. It's like she was just an ordinary girl in her time, but now she's a superstar.
No, but see, I think that fucking scene where they're all running out to the bog and freaking out the whole time, and like it's just then the survivors all huddle there, and then the guy comes with the fire, like. That really illuminates to me how desperate and basic this fucking tribe is when they first start out this quest.
Fire illuminates something? No.
Well, I think that the whole scene really was to show how important fire was to their survival.
Yeah.
Showing them cold and they really were cold. I mean, it was extremely
cold and desperate. One of them drops dead.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, if we're to assume
Sorry, continue, Brandon.
So after the bog, when they first see a flock of whatever animal that they see over the horizon, they're like, food, 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 what food? So to me.
I imagine that drooling is how most of us are gonna like anticipate the reopening of thrift stores and like Best Buy and shit.
Probably,
it's like I can just go buy fucking DVDs again instead of ordering them on Amazon. This is amazing.
eBay has been my friend.
eBay's good unless I'm trying to get something fucking crispy. Then I want to just order that Amazon, But of course that varies.
So,
Godzilla versus Biollante taught me a valuable lesson lately, which is that
now on the wildlife, am I remembering correctly that the first use of the wolves was during that opening sequence as well?
Yep, right after they flee, while they're fleeing, someone gets eaten by wolves, crotch first.
No, they showed them before, didn't they? Kind of lurking around and trying.
Yeah, and he tossed the torch at him.
So they were kind of showing right there the importance of fire to save them from predators, which is kind of.
I did like the show of
Wild.
I did kind of feel for the man that they kind of had to leave behind to the wolves.
Yeah.
There for a moment because and that white one just kind of snarled. It was like, "Arr!"
Oh, that's some brilliant wolf footage.
Yeah.
Yes, this is before domestication, I would guess. But some of the dogs the wolves in this felt kind of like dogs to me, like just the way they made sounds and like the way they acted. Like I think they just got dogs that looked like wolves, but I could kind of tell,
Yeah.
Still savage, that scene where it's like
something was
snarling over
off.
his corpse.
I mean, technically, the earliest domesticated canines, would have been derived from early wolves,
Right.
and
Oh, they would have been wolves, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, I have a friend who, well, she's actually now a neighbor of mine in my new apartment complex, but she has a dog, who I forget she's like a mixed breed, I think, but that particular dog, she looks very wolf-like,
Right.
and very sweet, friendly dog. Got a loud bark, but very sweet and loyal and everything. But she looks very wolf-like. Like if you were to plop her, in the wilderness, like you might mistake her for a wolf. And so yeah, they definitely exist. Dogs that can look very wolf-like.
They certainly weren't imitation wolves like huskies. So
No. Yeah, they look good.
Hmm.
We kind of mentioned the Saber-Tooth Tigers there, but the one that really got me were the Woolly Mammoths. I kind of wondered, like, because at first I was like, is that a puppet or what is that?
uh,
It looked like correct me if I'm wrong, it looked like what they did was they took real elephants and maybe put some, like,
yeah,
almost like fur coats on them or
Yeah.
something.
They did. Actually, there's an episode that they were talking about, which was kind of funny, where a couple of them got loose,
Hmm.
and apparently the costumes were also tasty. So
Oh
they would
no.
eat the stuff. They would eat the costumes off of each other.
That maybe explains why it smells the straw for so long before it actually puts it in its
Is it
mouth. Because I
tasty?
was like, why is it smelling the straw for so long? That's not how
But
elephants work.
I'm
Yeah.
believing, if I'm remembering correctly, that the scene with the saber-toothed cats was not far into their journey. Right.
well,
No,
Yeah.
not very
No, they
far
get
at all.
attacked by them like right away.
So
That's their first foil, pretty
my
much.
thing is when
I
you
do
saw
want to mention there, as a plants person, I appreciated that
When they're
scene.
eating the tree.
Because they go up that tree, which, as Dave said, does look a little bit like the one from Jungle Book. But they get up there, and the cats, they're just there. They're just like, yeah, we'll wait.
Yeah, I love that
we're
it doesn't show
patient.
them like eat a couple of handfuls and then leave. Like they've cleared the whole tree
Yeah.
by the time he falls out of there.
But one thing
Yeah.
that often occurs to me as a plant geek, but also as someone who works in the field, who works a lot with right now, growing your own food is going to probably become an even bigger thing than it has been. But there's also the whole thing of like foraging. A lot of people like to forage, eat the weeds, as it were, whatever. And I have often wondered what triggers people to try a new plant.
Hmm.
Right.
Throughout history, what has triggered people?
I've
And
always
in a
wondered that.
situation
Like you're
like
just sitting
this,
there and you're like, yeah,
yeah,
fuck it.
Well, and if you look at like the history of tea
right,
across the world, like think about it, it's like,
right,
and it's obviously been in several different cultures, and I guess in
right,
China they have like a lot of legends about the origin of tea. But like think about it like this: you're a primitive human, and it's like, okay, that brown water over there, don't drink that; it's bad.
mm,
This brown water over here, it's actually good and it won't kill you. It's like
Yeah.
right.
who had to be the guinea pig to figure that out?
Yeah, so it's
I
like
think,
this was a
man.
good
Like,
illustration of they were desperate and hungry and they had to try it,
well,
and it
I
worked.
think
And
generally though through history how that works is people are like, this smells good. We'll
yeah,
try to make stuff out of it.
or
And then
people have a tendency to like things that look tasty.
Mhm.
And
yes.
one of my favorite stories that I've read is about I don't know if y'all have read or heard this, the origin of human use of coffee. According to the story, some monk in like Ethiopia or somewhere in that region, or some guy in that sort of line of work, happened to notice that when goats ate certain berries, they got really giddy,
Uh,
really hyper.
Yeah, well, I
Oh,
think a lot of that stuff, like they probably tested it. They either observed animals eating it or not eating it, and or might have tested it on animals first, or maybe the village idiot. I don't know.
I've personally always really wondered how like bread was discovered. Like
yeah.
Yeah,
just baking in general. It's like, how do you know that this does this, and then you can combine it with this, and then get this? Like how?
yeah,
I feel like it was
Uh,
accidental. They were trying
yeah.
to use stuff they knew was edible to produce other effects, and then it was like, well, this weird little nobule of like edible dough grew over here.
Yeah,
Maybe
a
that's
lot of
like
that
a
stuff.
thing.
Maybe
Yeah.
they
A lot
were
of that
eating
stuff is
For
accidental.
example, the fermentation process. I read that chimpanzees and other high apes actually have a preference for slightly fermented fruits because they know it gives them a buzz.
That's
And
neat.
so,
So,
Well, dude, I mean, that's kind of the quest of this movie. Really, is progression. That's
Yeah.
the message of it
So,
overall.
but
When you
they
get
did
to the
not
end of it,
discover
is
alcohol in this one.
in
No,
essence,
these guys have kind of learned about actual love making and actual, sustainability in
Yeah.
the time that they've been going through this quest.
Well,
And the
one
quest
one
itself cannot be understated. I think that we're all glossing over the fact that this is like some Lord of the Rings shit right here, except with
yeah.
cavemen,
Well,
and they
very
go through
very
this
very
pretty
quickly,
fantastical adventure,
very
taming
quickly before we
mammoths and
leave.
fucking, it's insane becoming part of new cultures. Like it's a nuts adventure that these dudes go on.
Well,
Looking
very
for the
very quickly
one
before we
flame to
leave
rule them all.
very quickly before we leave the tree there, one of my favorite moments is when because I kind of wondered, like with the saber-tooth tigers, I was sort of like, okay, so they're gonna be patient and wait for them to like fall out of the tree or to whatever, get for them to get down or whatever. I was sort of like, if you're those cats, like what's your patience level? Are you gonna at what point do you just say fuck it and go off and look for something else? Which obviously they did reach that threshold, because I
Right.
love it when
I'm
the one
pretty sure
guy,
they
when he
got one of those gazelles that the guys were
probably.
looking at shortly after, where they're all drooling and
Well,
shit.
but
Yeah.
I thought it was so funny that, like, at first you're like, okay, how long are they gonna wait? Like, are these particularly patient cats, or and then when the one guy falls out of the tree, I was sort of in my head, I was like, did he just fall on one of the saber-tooth tigers? But no, they weren't down there. But so I
Yeah,
guess
it's a
that they
great
did reach
moment.
their
It's one of the better
threshold.
moments in the movie, I think.
Yeah, I guess they did reach their patience threshold. But
Mhm.
I did like it when he does fall out of the tree. He freaks out and he's like, "Oh wait, they're not here."
So what about that scene where they first like see the fire after all of that, and they're like, "Holy shit!" Like they're all freaking out, and then they fucking make their way there, and they're rolling around in the ashes and stuff. And the one guy Ron Perlman picks up a piece and starts eating it, and that's when the main dude picks up a skull, and it's like,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty nice. I mean, I'm a fan of cannibalism in fiction for whatever reason. I don't know
yeah,
why,
I love it too. I don't know why, man. Like a good,
but
We were
good.
talking yesterday about that. Like, hey, there was some cannibalism in the Quest for Fire.
yeah. Well, I mean, I thought it was pretty cool.
Nice little Soul and Green moment. Yeah.
Dude, not only is
What's
there a little bit
interesting?
of cannibalism in Quest for
Well,
Whoa, what happened? Where'd he
Yeah, what
go?
happened?
I think he
You muted
muted
yourself, my
himself.
dude.
Whoops.
What was?
Not only is there a little bit of cannibalism in Quest for Fire, but they eventually find out that like this tribe that they've tracked with their fire has these people trussed up against trees. Like the one motherfucker has like one of his arms already chopped off, and the dude's eating it right in front of
Yeah.
him.
Yeah,
You know,
which I liked
it's,
the fact that, I mean, one of the interesting things about cannibalism is that it has been, in some form or fashion, it's been pretty universal throughout human history. It's
yeah,
never
everyone
been,
does.
well, but it has been universal, and yet it has never really been overly mainstream. I mean,
Acceptable.
yeah, exactly.
I mean,
It's
South Park mainstream from a cannibal story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that fucking you can really compare the two, but I think that cannibalism happens in situations that most mainstream people
Yeah.
wouldn't understand, you know.
Well, I find that an interesting observation that something so common, yeah, it's so common and yet it's so not mainstream in pretty much every society, more or less. And I think that's an
Well,
interesting
the ones
thing.
we think of, honestly, if you were to take a total worldwide census of societies that headhunting was probably normal for before we came in, it would have probably outnumbered us, you know.
Well, but it also, yeah, it wasn't. I don't think it was like, yeah, well, at least not anymore, or even I don't even know if it was
Maybe
even.
they should bring it back. Point
I don't
is,
know,
these
but
guys are
the
fucking headhunting and chewing the flesh off the bones, and
yeah,
these dudes roll up on that shit using very ingeniously a carcass pelt to mask their scent, you know.
yeah,
And they
which I
roll
mean,
up on these ginger troglodytes, and they've got these people fucking all trussed up. And I definitely use this opportunity as a moment to make like ginger jokes with my girlfriend because she's totally a ginger. She's probably listening right now. You
Hello,
know, it's
the wild part was that one person, like you said, with the arm partially severed and just kind of hanging there.
he's
It's
looking
like,
at him like it's his worst fucking nightmare. Because imagine
yeah,
how that would be, like watching someone eat your fucking arm. Fuck
well,
that.
and you would just, I'm
I'd have
more
thought he would have bled
surprised.
out pretty fast.
Yeah, I was more surprised that that person,
Like
well,
how he was
hadn't,
alive.
well,
Well,
hadn't
too-
bled
Hey,
out.
wound was elevated, man. He was hanging on the bottom of the tree, so you never know.
So
Well, I was
to
like,
bring
why
it back
didn't it,
to
why
bring it
didn't it
back
bleed
to a
out?
couple of weeks ago, when is you're alive when they start to eat you?
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was surprised it didn't bleed out, but also that that person wasn't like screaming in horrific pain, you know, because of, well, A, that's a painful thing, and B,
Shock, man.
yeah, maybe, I guess, but
It's
Could have
all
been
right,
hanging
sir.
there. He
I've got
looked from
another.
his stance, like, you know, totally
Well-
limp, like he'd been there a while. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I guess that's also when we meet our leading lady, who
Mm-hmm.
I looked it up, and she's actually the daughter of Tommy Chop, which is kind of interesting.
That is
Who?
super cool.
Like Cheech
Um,
and
Tommy
Chong.
Yeah,
Really?
she's Tommy Chong's daughter. Let me. I forget what
Wow.
I forget what her first name is. I'm gonna look
Ray
it up.
Dawn.
Yeah, Ray Dawn Chong, and she actually. So I don't know if we made this clear enough, but this film was a Canadian and French co-production of a Belgian novel, and at the Genie Awards. Well, it was nominated for a bunch of Caesar Awards, you know, the French Academy Awards, basically. And at the Genie Awards, which were they're the big awards, or they were before they became the Canadian Film and Television Awards. But like,
That's way fucking cooler than that and the Grammys combined.
yeah,
The
well,
Genie Awards.
they that was back when they were called that, but that was like their big Academy Award, basically, and she actually won Best Actress for her role there, which
Honestly, no surprise, because the girl is one of the things I think that legitimizes the movie. She comes in there speaking that very different dialect, gives them probably one of the only medicinal blowjobs ever recorded, and because she definitely did not go that deep under the fucking animal pelt,
Oh,
just rubbing on an ointment, bro.
she's the
Like,
prototypical life lady.
she put the cucumber in her mouth and she's like, "This is how we do it." And he was like, "Oh, sir." You know,
Well,
fucking.
which
That's how the scene played to me, because she could have rubbed it on him without going. She didn't have to fucking go under the hood.
yeah,
I didn't really
Uh,
think about it all that much.
yeah,
Well,
no,
seriously, those
when
if you
she's-
think about it, they chew the medicine. It makes most sense. I think honestly, in a lot of places, they do spit the shit onto you.
Yeah.
And for some Neanderthal guy that's never even, I mean, he's only ever like mounted girls like he did at the campfire. And she teaches them that later in the movie, that there can be a more tender, like, feeling way of things. That's kind of a theme throughout the last half of the movie, if you think about it.
She really educates them, like, on a lot of different things too. Like,
yeah, they learn how to laugh, they learn how to make fire. They, it's kind of, it really is sort of a powerful thing when you think about it.
One thing that makes her, like, really distinct right away is, like, they're just, like, kind of making sounds. And even though you can't understand, even though you can't understand what she's saying, like, it's recognizable as it's much more recognizable as a language. It's like, okay,
she's repeating words. She's like, basically, meaning. Get the fuck over here. What are you guys doing? Get over here. I can help you cure this fucking bad medicine that he's got.
Also,
and plus,
kind of a fun thing too. So I just saw Color Out of Space, and Tommy Chong is in that. So there's a connection there.
Still say that he should have had a much bigger role, but that's neither here nor there.
No,
what were you going to say,
was
Brandon?
amazing anyway, so it's fine.
Well, what was neat with her is that, she didn't really, at least natively, didn't really wear clothes, but she had the body paint, which was kind of cool, because that's a much more intricate, kind of civilized, cultural thing to do. And obviously she still had it, but she adopted the animal skins.
Wearing furs near the end.
Yeah, I mean, because it's also bloody cold.
Their tribe does have a lot of the kind of trappings that the other ones does not, like the using the dyes to color yourself, and
the reeds to make the masks and things. They're definitely in their own rut as far as advancement goes. I think it's a cool portrait of, like, them, two different elements coming together and having that intangible feeling that you have for someone else.
Yeah,
because when she's really gone later on too, he takes off. If you remember, that's I think something that we're skimming over a little bit right here. Like he gets lonely without her and ends up setting off back into the territory.
So basically, they pass by. She knows they're near her home, and she wants them to go this way, and they want to go the other way.
And she goes with them for a ways, but then retreats, and I think that's one of the most, I don't know, the pretentious word for it, poignant movie moments of the movies. Like, it's fucking where you're like, holy shit, like, she really loves him, but she came this far in, but she can't go any further because of, obvious reasons.
I don't know if you can quite say, like, emotions like that yet. I think I would have maybe said more preference.
Yeah,
I think it exists. Honestly, I would argue
again, it's
that's
like the very beginnings of this kind of stuff.
I would argue of it. As far as this movie goes, that's the moment where it starts, because that's when, if you remember afterwards, that's where he gets, like, weirdly lonely and not wanting to go towards his objective anymore, like he has the entire time. That's when he's like, I'll backtrack and walk around the mud until I find something to do with this girl, And
they find.
Go ahead.
And there's a definite evidence, even before they get to the tribe, that there's differing levels of advancement throughout the different tribes. When they come upon that hut, I think right after that, he's like throwing the spear just to see, is there anybody there?
Yeah.
But then they find that actual jar, that clay jar that was made.
See, I can't fucking help but connect. I'm sorry, bro, but maybe it's just because I watched it just recently, but I can't help but connect that to that part in Throne of Blood where they meet the witch in the forest or something.
Well,
like, for some reason, the build up to that reminded me of Throne of Blood, but that's probably because I just watched it.
What is going on in the background?
That's my kid. I'm sorry, man.
Well, the something interesting there was I did find it funny. So when he does go after her, and his friends kind of eventually follow him. You're almost led to believe it's like, hey man, did you forget who your friends are? And why are you going after some chick, man? And then the part that yeah, exactly. But like and that's kind of how Ron Perlman was. He was sort of, trying to be like, whatever. After he was getting rejected, because he doesn't get any during the course of the movie.
No.
But the part that I was a little confused about, and maybe other people got it. So when our main hero, I kind of called him Barry Gibb, for whatever reason, that was who he was in my head. When he gets to the more advanced tribe, and
Dan
they,
Lab would have been appropriate for this one too.
which,
Yeah,
it would.
they kind of roll him around and like poke at him a lot.
Well, that
Sorry
and like
about that, guys.
well, and they basically give him the fat girl to fuck, I guess.
Fuck!
Well,
Actually,
well, what was that? Was that meant to be like a mockery, or what was that? I didn't
I don't-
understand that.
I kept thinking Futurama, Death by Snoo Snoo.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, dude, she's sitting there at first and she's like laying there all casually. Then the part that made me fucking die was when she mounted up on all fours and was like arching the back waiting for him. Yeah.
Yeah, she was like,
That
yeah,
was where it's
go
like,
for it.
holy shit, this just turned into something right here.
Well,
It's
I
like-
kind
I know,
of
it-
wondered if that was like a prototypical like Tuesday night stripper who doesn't really give a shit. Like I kind of wondered if it was that same kind of "what are
think-
you looking at" kind of
I think
attitude. I don't know.
it's kind of the other way around. I think he was being offered like, I think like the main females in the tribe. So it's almost like he was the hired.
The honored guest, I guess.
Yeah, that was the
Oh,
impression I
yeah.
got. Like it had a very like ritualistic feel to it because
Well,
it
to me,
was.
that whole scene was them being advanced enough to know that they have to diversify their population. So
Something
they're
like
like, no, you have to fucking have sex with them. And then they like throw rocks at that girl when she tries to lay down with them.
Yeah.
And then
You know,
once you inseminate the women of the tribe, that's when they honor you by a bean dinner.
fuck that bitch. She gonna collect
No,
child support and
that's,
rocks. He fucking took off
Yeah.
and lived the good life with the,
Well,
the
yeah.
proper piece. Yeah.
Again, there are worse things than death by Snoo Snoo.
Well, there's some pretty interesting anthropological stuff to unpack there in regards to like tribal rituals and I guess just kind of perceptions between groups that we could have explored. But I suppose really stupid jokes work too.
It's all about your preference, bud. I mean, did you have something you wanted to add to it?
Oh, no,
It's all good.
I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Like if you knew more about, because I'm sure they researched, different cultural customs when writing this, and it made me kind of curious.
Yeah,
if
we're
this
also
was, like, a real
obviously,
thing from the
like
past.
simplifying this for the
Yeah.
sake of brevity here, but you
was-
know,
But,
Anthropologist that actually evidently by the name of Desmond Morris, who developed the movements and the gestures of the different tribes and
oh
things.
yeah, and that was cool. I mean, it did have like some humor to it because I'm just gonna call him the shaman or the chief or whatever he was. Like the shaman's like he comes in and he clearly says something to the guy. They're like giving him food and stuff. Rah, 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 rah. And the girl
Yeah.
comes in and he just like looks back and he's like, "What?" And then she like assumes different positions and he's like, "What? All right."
I like how
It
squishy
takes
the
him a
sound
while.
of them whipping their sticks sounded.
Yeah.
It like sounded all squishy and uncomfortable.
There's like an audience too, like outside the hut. It's like a hut, like the walls are built like really with like a lot of space. It's got like windows.
Yeah, it's like a literal peep show.
Yeah, I mean, so it answers a good question. Would you guys throw down, or what's up? Who
I'd
here
probably
would
be
throw
too
down in
suspicious.
the
It's
peep
like,
show?
nah, you're gonna stab me in the back or something when I'm distracted. No.
Well,
I think it'd be different if it was like nowadays times, but I think if it was back then, I'd show them some moves or something.
Everyone wants the sacred orgy.
I think it would really depend on if you could understand them or not, because like if you can't understand them, then you don't know their intentions.
Right.
I mean, I
Yeah.
assume it appeared to be at least somewhat of a good gesture, I guess. But again, it could have been a trick. It could have been a who knows what, a mockery. I don't know. But yeah, that again, I guess that goes back to why language is so important.
I
gets,
actually think that there was. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
He gets trapped in the quicksand, like surrounding
Mm-hmm.
their village, and like they come out to like laugh at him.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite get that at first, but it's like, oh, this is like
I kind of like
trap
that part.
people
I
who
don't
know
know
where to
why.
step.
Yeah.
And
Where they're like tossing spears at him and rocks, and they fucking knock him out.
Well, I
And
think
the
also
girl's
they
like, "Hey, chill out!" Like
Yeah.
she's telling him the whole
Don't
time,
kill
and
this guy.
no one
Well,
cares.
they
Like,
probably
launch him.
they probably set up their village near those
Pits for that
quicksand
reason.
or tar pits or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, they probably set them up specifically for trap purposes, and
The others
and
get
and
trapped.
good on them too. But yeah, I mean the language barrier or the whatever kind of primitive form of communication. I mean, I think that would be a challenge. Plus, the one thing that they didn't really do, which I mean, they wouldn't have really had time for it, and it wouldn't have really been all that important. But like, just speaking of like offering the girl to him and everyone watching, this is true. Apparently, humans evolutionarily they developed the moaning during sex. They developed that as a way to signal to the other primitive humans in the group that this was going on, and thus would get more sex going on, and thus create more probability that the species would be propagated.
I'm behind this rule.
Oh,
Let's
okay.
do
well,
it.
that's why that's there, and they didn't really like. You saw a little bit of that when they were doing more of like the passionate lovemaking towards the end, but like it wasn't quite. It wasn't
I thought
so
it came
much.
full circle in a nice way, in
Yeah.
a nice tender kind of way,
Yeah.
given the context of the story.
Yeah,
I thought they
that's just
told
an
the whole
interesting.
thing in a really, fluid way that kept you interested the entire time, despite the lack of dialogue.
Yeah, well, that's just an interesting little tidbit there as to why that developed in the first place.
No,
I hate to
will
rush my
say
part
that-
in this, man, but I gotta go, guys. Like, I have a kid that's freaking
Jumping
out over
around.
here. Yeah, so I gotta
Well,
bounce.
yeah.
But,
Thanks for being on with us.
Yeah.
well, thanks,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, thanks for giving me the privilege of fucking talking about this with you guys. I think this is a movie that a lot of people need to see. I think it's a movie that a lot of people would read off if they were to read on paper. Like it's
real fast.
no.
What's your favorite
dial-
scene?
Oh, favorite scene? Honestly, probably just that transition between them sitting in the tree. And then the next, when they shoot the tigers, all fucking awesome with like the light behind them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the cinematography overall is my favorite thing in the movie. They make those those landscapes look so fucking wide, and
Beautiful.
like they would just swallow you, So like every point where they show like a wide landscape scene in the movie is pretty much breathtaking. So if I had to pick a favorite point, that would be it for sure.
All right, cool. Thanks for sharing with us. So
Thanks for asking, Dustin.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that.
All right.
I'm sorry I have to bounce early, guys. It's just, became a situation that demands too much attention. So
Well,
Doesn't have
kids
to.
take precedence.
Yep.
tap into your inner caveman, listen to the
Yeah.
soundtrack of this, just look at all the visuals, listen to what these guys have to say. You guys will have a good time.
Yeah, we didn't really in the story. We didn't really get to the whole like newborns or anything. But if we were to have done that, then that protecting the newborns and teaching them and all that would have taken precedence over everything else. just like it
Exactly.
does today.
Yep.
So I
Cheers,
wanted
guys.
to
Thanks
touch
for having
Bye.
me.
Take care. I wanted to touch real quickly on all the sex and such involved in this. This is one of those films that apparently had won the extreme ire of the evangelical side
Oh, gee whiz.
for multiple reasons. Matter of fact, apparently the director had said that he had gotten life-threatening letters from people about evolution and the gratuitous sex, like you're scarring our children by saying that they would, that man could possibly be like that. And of course, he left.
You mean the children that are supposed to watch an R-rated movie? Those children?
Yeah. I didn't say it was, correct, in but
Yeah.
Politically
Just-
incorrect.
is
You're not supposed to be bringing your children to an R-rated film. So.
Seriously. And I mean, truth be told, nature doesn't give a shit about your sensitivities. It's like, in that kind of situation. I mean, that's honestly one of the things I love about thinking about prehistoric times is that, yeah, things are very primitive and all that, but you also distill human behavior down to its essence, and you kind of wash away all of the trappings and all of the pretensions that we have about how advanced we are. It's like all that we've done is really just mask or further sophisticate our primitive instincts, because if you look at the way society is, we're still hierarchically oriented, we're still largely tribalistic, we still have competition for mates, in some form or fashion, in more sophisticated ways. We still compete, we still have a sense of territoriality, all those things. And so when you watch something like this or you read about animalistic behavior and everything, it really just helps to distill everything down to who and what we really are as beings. And I think that that's a very important perspective to have, because it helps to underpin everything else.
Well, I to go ahead and keep going since it is getting late.
Yeah.
Why don't we? I think that we really did cover most of it up until the end, which of course the ending is the one thing we haven't really covered. They get back with the fire. The guy kind of comically falls and douses
Well,
the flame.
before that, we saw a brief moment when they're sent on the quest where certain people within their own tribe were a little, I don't know if they were jealous or just kind of but they were not on the same page, and they actually end up having an encounter with these people on the way back, which doesn't go so well for certain individuals, but which that kind of goes back to Dane's point. Even back then, there were fractious and unproductive behaviors with people. And,
well, and you even saw, which it's not even all that explicit or important, but you still saw within the main character's tribe, you still saw an overall kind of chief of some sort. He was, an older man. You still saw the hierarchical structures that we still have today. And then even within their group of three, you saw some vying for dominance, and you saw like a clear expression of that dominance, and like exemplified by mating privileges, with the female and that sort of thing, and female sexual selection and all that kind of stuff that again still goes on today. It's just we wrap it up in so much kind of, let's say, fancy gift wrap, within our civilization, but those instincts are still 100% there. And it's just very important to always keep that in mind, because it helps to strip away all of the nonsense that we like to surround ourselves with, and it keeps the focus on what we really are.
Like, you made a lot of really good points there. Also, that reminds me of a book from a while ago called Sex at Dawn. It's like an anthropological study of, I guess, some of those habits. I read it a very, very long time ago, and I don't really remember much of it. But I think anybody interested in kind of more of that aspect of the movie should check that book out, Sex at Dawn. It's I think it's from the 80s, and it was a fairly popular thing, so it shouldn't be too difficult to find. Also, just kind of a funny note too. That reminded me of like Mulder's monologue in the Simpsons episode where Mulder and Scully show up, where he starts talking about like some really deep subject, and it's like at noon. And then it cuts away, and it's like the middle of the night, and he's still standing in the same spot talking.
Yeah. That was very true to that series, to the X-Files. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty fascinating when you research anthropologically and sociologically, when you research primitive human, and also some apes and things, when you research mating rituals and different factors that go into sexual selection of either male or female partners, and all those kinds of things. And then you look at, generally speaking, like what a lot of men look for in women and vice versa. You see a lot of overlap. Now, obviously, you do have things that they didn't have quite so much of back then, which is like, personality, capabilities, and life experience, which you could only share with language. So that you do have, and that couldn't really be replicated in nature per se, and that's a factor. But you still do see, like, at least in this film, you still do see like the cuddling, courtship, intimacy on a deeper level, and that's a step beyond just normal mating instinct, but it's still there, and it again, it informs everything else that we have built on top of it since then.
All right.
Okay. And
Did we talk about? We didn't talk about the. Well, there are a couple of cool scenes that I think we should maybe cover, just real brief. There's a fight with that bear, which
the really fake looking bear.
Oh my god! Like, it was kind of funny.
Well, for a movie that like has surprisingly realistic looking saber-tooth tigers and really, really realistic looking woolly mammoths, I think they might have been a little bigger than that in real life, but like for the time, like, you're like, holy shit, that's a woolly mammoth, and it's moving. It's not a puppet or anything. So for a movie that had that in it, and then you see this really, really fake looking bear. So like you had like a shot or two that had a real bear, but then it was intercut with this really fake looking bear suit. And I'm like, oh man, oh, this movie, you got everything right except that.
It was definitely not the bear that we saw in Pathfinders.
Yeah, that was a real bear. And granted, they probably had more of a advanced bear wrangler on set at that time. I don't know what the state of bear wrangling was in the 80s, but yeah, it was. Admittedly, they did, try to get some close-ups that would have been unsafe with a real bear at that time. Not counting The Revenant, which of course had like the best bear on man action I think that's ever been put on film, and it's very, very intense.
You should have put that on the title of the case.
That's bear wrangling action.
No, just like that, best bear on man action. That would have sold some DVDs.
It was kind of amazing, like, he didn't die, because it was really like, it was messing him up.
I was thinking that was like, I can't believe he walked away. Well, he didn't walk directly away from that, but
it's like, how did you not die, like, there or here? They just show the bear like swatting him, like biting him in the face. It's like, damn.
So, and you had another scene you wanted to mention?
Yeah, when she first shows him like how to make fire, like they kind of take him away to a cave.
Yeah. I think there was
And
someone
it's
else who's showing him, but yeah, that was a fun scene because he's like his wonder is like he just can't contain his excitement.
plus the way it's like he doesn't understand like what it is at first. Like the whole way that scene is shot is just so brilliant, and then with the music too, it's like, I mean, imagine if the concept of just making fire did not exist to you. Like,
Right.
what would you be thinking in that moment? It was shot almost like we were seeing like a witchcraft in action,
Yeah.
which it must have been, to people that didn't know.
Yeah.
I to give the caveman or give our main character a bit of credit. That is a really rough method of creating fire.
Yeah.
Oh
I
yeah.
have done it a number of times, and I will say that is not an easy method. You've got to make sure this is, just totally like, you got to really work it.
As he
I
found
know.
out when he tried to demonstrate it himself, which again, that scene was pretty good. That was the, and I like the part where, yeah, she's kind of like, move over, let me show them. That was kind of, that was pretty
So
good.
I think the original, the first scene where I think that scene is probably my favorite. Just the first, guess what you can do with these sticks.
Yeah.
So, did we get the special effects and music covered?
The music on this is pretty good.
Yeah.
A lot of the effects, kind of fuzzy, but well, there was a nice scene where they fend off some other Neanderthals. Like does she show them how to make like throwers for spears instead of just
yeah.
Yeah. I did.
Well,
You did
Hello?
what?
We did.
I guess. So
Oh,
yeah.
I just thought that was cool, and I think that was like some of the most convincing like effects in the thing, because it looked like those guys were really getting hit by those.
Yeah.
The music was by Philip Sard. Or
And then of course you had the Oscar-winning makeup. Which,
he was the composer for the Lord of the Flies in the 90s. Just looking at this, seeing if there's anything that I can see out of hand that I would probably recognize. A lot of The Bear from the 1988. He was the music behind that. Which the director of this was actually the director of Bears. So,
the only issue I ever had that I had with the music was sometimes I felt like the music could be overly dramatic at times. It was very well composed, but there were sometimes I was like, okay, this is a little bit over the top for this scene at this time. But otherwise, I really liked it. I mean, and also we can't discount the acting level when it comes to the effects, really, because in this movie in particular, the acting makes the effects. And this, a lot of it wasn't acting either, because there were things like, for instance, in the tiger scene, the deer skins they were wearing were very tasty to the animals. So the animals actually did legit want to eat them, so they were having trouble getting them out from under the tree. So they were legit scared they're going to get eaten by these tigers.
Yeah.
Luckily, they didn't pull a stunt like I watched one of my cats do today, where he just reared back on his hind legs and jumped up like a kangaroo, and it's like, it's like,
possible. It's very possible that their reactions were quite real.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I was a little confused as to why the Saber-Tooth Tigers, why they just kind of didn't. Well, I mean, maybe because the tree was too, maybe the branches were too thin to support their weight, I guess. But like, I mean, that's the whole idea with tigers is that they can climb trees. You know, I assume that they were perhaps not wanting to exert themselves, and they're like, they'll come to us because they'll, you know, try to get down or something. But you know, because oftentimes in nature, you know, predators will not expend any more energy than necessary, you know, to get a meal, and so perhaps that is, so perhaps
Probably not
that's
worth the
why.
trouble.
I would think so, and I guess that's also why eventually they're just like, fuck it, we'll get a gazelle or something. Yeah, like you want to grab a gazelle for lunch? Yeah, sure. No. And yeah, but I guess the thing that I didn't get was, so the one guy, okay, gets attacked by a bear, gets fucked up pretty bad, and he gets a rock dropped on his head to where he actually bleeds, which pretty badly, which Ron Perlman didn't even have that happen when he had the rock drop on his head. But like, so this guy's pretty fucked up, and yet, you know, he seems to make it to the end. I mean, who knows? Maybe he could have died of his wounds or his infection or something. But you know, I was like, man, you lasted a lot longer than I thought you would.
Maybe
and
he was the start of the Johnny Knoxville lineage.
maybe, but what was really funny was when Ron Perlman. I don't know if anyone noticed this. So when Ron Perlman was observing Barry Gibb and his lady getting it on for real, you know, hot and heavy this time. And he's just sort of like, dude, check this out. You know, you could see that with his friend there. And then he kind of touches his foot, so the other guy's foot slightly, and he's like, dude, get off of me, you know, because he's like, what? I gotta get something. I haven't gotten anything in this movie. And you know, he's just like, no, I don't roll that way. And
They're just kind of there like,
yeah, well, I mean, because, you know, again, this is something that would make the, you know, Christian conservatives' heads explode. But I mean, you do see homosexuality occurring in nature, and you do see it for, you know, kind of dominance reasons or for, you know, other reasons. But I thought that was kind of funny to see. Like, he's like, I gotta get something in this thing, and he's like, nope,
All right.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
So,
Talk about that ending scene or no?
Oh yeah, the ending is pretty cool. Like, so they make it back to what's left of their tribe, and everything seems more or less okay. Like, they drop the fire in the bog like right away, and everybody's like, ah! And then they're like, wait, and they sit everybody down, and you know, they make the fire. Like, he needs like her help to like really get it going, but he's kind of got the right idea at least. And they're able to make fire, and all is well. And it ends with our main Neanderthal and the girl, like, they, you know, it's night. They're sitting up and looking at the stars. And he notices that she's pregnant, and it's just kind of like a really sweet ending.
yeah,
It's like,
they're gonna have a wee baby.
Yeah.
Well, because knowing, you know, that Neanderthals went extinct, but were also to some degree like assimilated into Homo sapiens, so it's kind of like, yeah.
And that's how you get Ozzy Osbourne and Ron Perlman.
And the Irish.
Um,
I say that as someone who's Irish.
Yeah.
To some degree.
Me too.
I just thought that was so funny.
That is funny.
We did talk about special effects, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were mixed. Some of the animals were really fake. Like, the one thing I want to point out about the Saber-Tooth Tigers is that I'm not sure how interested they would have actually been like in humans, because those teeth are pretty big, and they're kind of designed just for like slicing throats. So you can't really bite into anything that would struggle against them all too hard with that. Like, they are meant to, you and a couple other tigers like pin down like a giant wildebeest or whatever
Yeah.
mammal, and you almost like box cutter its throat out with those.
Yeah.
Like that's what they're designed for.
Well,
'Cause they did.
if you look back at their behavior, they kind of were like, "Hey, these guys are out here. Are you hungry? I'm not starving, but I could eat. Well, okay, we'll see what happens here." And then they get bored and they're like, "Hey, you want to just grab some? You want to just
They
grab
just
some?
give up on the humans pretty quick. True.
Yeah, they're just like,
Yeah.
"Hey, you want to grab
Yeah.
some antelope? Yeah, sure, whatever." They seem pretty just kind of apathetic about the whole thing. Like it was like, "Oh yeah, we really want to eat at McDonald's, but maybe we'll settle for a Hardee's, but I don't know." It's like, and then they do see one, and they're like, "Okay, yeah, that's where we really want to go."
Alrighty. Favorite moments, starting with you, Dustin.
Oh, I already said my favorite scene was the initial was, this is how you make fire. I mean,
Okay.
if you want to talk like a still or whatever from that, it's when she's got the thing with like the spark with the embers like in her hand, and it's like there's smoke. It's hard to describe, but there's like smoke billowing like all around her. Like
Mhm.
I thought that was a really cool shot. Like, I loved that.
Alrighty. Jake, favorite scene, if you could take one from this.
Well, I agree with Dustin that that's a powerful scene, but I think I do like that the reprise of it, the second part that where he tries and fails and then she takes over. I think it had a little bit of that amusement, but also was pretty useful overall. And yeah, I mean there were some other good scenes scattered throughout, but I think those two parts are probably my main ones.
All right. Dane, favorite scene.
Well, there's quite a lot of them that I liked. I mean, I did like it when the guy fell out of the tree. That was funny, but
Yeah.
I think, I think a scene that might take the number one spot is when she's showing him how to make love properly, make love the caveman way, shall we say? Do it caveman style. But I think because there's a lot of emotion between those two, and the other two. They all convey pretty significant kind of character defining and species defining moments and emotions with each other, and it's very subtle, but it's pretty key, and it's communicated between really all the characters. They all go through some pretty major changes there, and I think that's just, and it has tenderness, it has drama, and it also has some comedy in it as well.
Yeah. Brandon, if you could take something.
I actually really liked where they discover the hut and sort of discover a little bit of civilization. I don't know what it is about that, but it just where they're picking up the jar, it's just kind of cool because it's whatever they call it.
Anthropomorphizing.
Yeah.
They find like the gourd, and they're just looking at like, what the hell is this?
He tries to carry it all in his arms, and they keep falling out. That was
I'd have
funny.
to say one of my favorite moments is when dude fell. Well, actually, when the whole tree scene. For some reason, I find it somewhat comical. And when they're back up in the tree, and he keeps hitting the dude, and he falls on the ground after he smashed his own egg in his hand, and he's upset now that the last egg is gone. But
Yeah.
I actually kind of like the ape fight in the very beginning. For some reason, I like the gore. But I thought that was some pretty random fight scene, but in any case, I think that's about
Oh
it.
yeah, we went kind of long, as
In a
we've been
nutshell.
want to do lately, but there was a lot to talk about and a lot to enjoy in this movie. And I was originally gonna skip it, like I said, because I just had too much work to do. But I'm happy I'm happy I decided to be lazy, I guess, for lack of a
It's
better.
definitely worth a watch, I think, especially with.
I did do work while I was watching it, I guess.
Mhm.
Alrighty,
But
let's.
it was worth it. So anyway,
Justin.
I'm
Go.
I
ahead.
know we're doing our outro now, I think. So
Yep.
well, I'll do my outro. So I'm Dustin, also known as the Crypt of Horrors here on YouTube. I go to school here in Milwaukee, and I'm also a horror collector. So I pick up anything I can find related to horror. So figures, vinyl, mostly Blu-ray movies. I've been going completely insane in isolation. But I still was able to find some stuff online. So we've got a lot of pickup videos forthcoming. If I can just get enough of my work finished for school, that I can start publishing them. Like I have like 20 videos ready to go.
I have a few that I've been meaning to record myself, so I know exactly how you feel.
And apparently the Dollar General, like near me, they have movies, and I've never really looked at what they had. I found the Dirty Harry like 4-disc set, like all 4 Dirty Harry movies in that like multi-pack that sells on eBay for $20. Like I found that for like $6 just in a pile of junk.
Did it have the Deadpool? I mean, because that's the 5th film.
Is that officially a Harry?
Yes. Yes, it is.
I don't.
Yeah, the Deadpool.
Hold on a minute. One of you can go while I go grab it.
All right, Dane, why don't you go?
I am Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Been trying to get myself kind of reestablished personally. Did a lot of big changes in my life recently, but I'm starting to get settled in one of those points.
It didn't have the Deadpool.
Nah, but
only 4.
Nope, there's 5. But one of my new endeavors will be contributing to a new YouTube channel called Indie Horror Film Creative, and I'll be doing a couple different types of shows on there. I'll be doing Blu-ray collecting videos, as well as a series that I'm gonna call No Money Film School, which is where I kind of relay my experiences with making films from start to finish, and just aspects of not only film theory, but just, what's it like to make a film at this stage or to do whatever aspect of filmmaking. And it's no money film school because I'm not trying to bar entry, based on tuition or whatever. I'm just trying to give the knowledge to the masses so that way they can go off and do their own work, and hopefully learn something from my experience. And as I grow, then hopefully so should they.
I'm gonna head out.
All right, Justin.
Oh, subscribe to my channel, The Crypt of Horrors, on YouTube, and my Instagram, which is also The Crypt of Horrors. I'm The Crypt of Horrors everywhere except on Twitter, where I am now Cryptac. Where I am now, I think we went with The Cryptaxis, but for some reason, so I want to try to rebrand to have like one name, so I went with Cryptaxis. Apparently somebody else is already The Cryptaxis, which makes no sense because, I made that up. So I'm actually Der Cryptaxis on Twitter because, like those German like movie posters, like Der Blob, Der Thing, So anyway, shutting up. Have a great night and watch Quest for Fire. You'll be happy. Just maybe don't have kids in the room.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of gratuitousness.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of violence, and I mean, I'd say most of the nudity is not sexual in nature, and it is accurate to
surprisingly
primitive
tasteful,
humans.
to be honest.
I mean, I've seen that same level of nudity on like National Geographic whenever they've done caveman things, and they've been okay with showing it then, but it just again for perspective's sake.
Kind of funny that now that you mention it, one of my favorite movies, like as a kid, was Baby: Secret of the Lost Legend, and that has. I saw it again a couple of weeks ago for the first time in like almost a decade, and there are like a dozen topless women in like the first 5 minutes, like just all over the place because it was shot in Africa. So
Yeah. I mean, it's hot as balls down there, obviously. So they need to let their skin breathe.
the director got like malaria or something. Like they were talking about in one of the interviews where there was a period where he was trying to direct like from like a stretcher. It's like, okay, he would have somebody help him like sit up and he'd be like, action. And then when the scene was over, he'd be like, cut. And then he'd just like flop back down in like the stretcher and like throw up. And I was like, oh man.
Oh wow. That's dedication.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump
go.
off too. Yeah.
Right.
Night everybody.
Right.
All right. Brandon, why don't you go ahead?
Septum Sen of Septum Sen versus the World. We're a channel that loves physical media and that dedication. We do pickup videos and release videos, but of course we also work hard for Inside Movies Galore, and we help with the selections even. One of which is next week, which is our last week to this historic month. And we're doing the animated classic Ice Age.
Where's
Classic being a loose term.
There he is. And Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Brandon, I'm going to have you stay after just a moment so I can tell you my choices.
Okay.
All right. And I'm Jake. I am also active on Septum Sin versus the World, and we've been doing our best to keep bringing you good stuff, even with the separation due to events. But, and of course, is still active on this channel here. And I am also a collector, a big-time collector and viewer of all forms of media. And so that's all I have for you guys this week. And I have to get going too. So good night, all.
Okay, bud.
Night.
My name is David Straggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore, but I also somewhat moonlight on another channel called Delusions of Grandeur. There I do video pickups, videos, and video reviews that you can check out at your leisure. So, but definitely check out some of the newest interviews that I have done. The last I did was going on with a previous guest, and he's actually done a few more films. So I decided to have a totally separate interview with him. So definitely check that interview out. But that is all that we have for today, folks. And like we said, we are continuing the prehistoric journey into the Ice Age. Which I wonder if that's our doom or our gloom. So, in any case, definitely check some more exciting film discussions out. This is David Straggy signing off. You have a good afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you for listening.